Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Daled, and Yud Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, the halachas of HaTorah. We pick up today 3 lines off the bottom on Reish Tez Zayin Amud Beis in Siman Shin Samech Beis Sif Gimel. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasuna Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Ubein Bayabasha Hamakim Yirachem Aleihem V'Yitzia Mitzar Lervacha Me'afelu La'ira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagala of Izman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for Meiri V'Rabbi Rav Shalom Ruvain Ben Shima for Achia Gadol Moshe Meir Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak Ben Tzion Ben Dusha Rivka Bas Shira Leah Chava Hadassah Bas Razel Serel Yeshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malkachana. They should all have a Refuah Shalema B'Sarch Shar Chayei Yisrael. So we're continuing to learn the halachas of mechitzos b'negeya to the halachas of HaTorah. We know that a mechitza is a critical variable in all of the shilas that come up in HaTorah. Mechitzas make all the difference in the world between Rishos Harabim, Rishos Hayachid, etc., etc. So here we're learning the ins and outs of various types of mechitzas. Some of it is chazara on concepts that we already learned previously. So, for example, yesterday we really touched again upon the shaila of a karpef that's eina mukaf lidira. You have mechitzas that are put up for dira purposes, mechitzas that are not put up for dira purposes, and they have different ramifications in halacha. Again, today we're going to see some reiteration of concepts that we learned earlier. Says the Mechaber Tzif Gimel, mechitza ha'imedes me'eleha, a mechitza that came about on its own. What does that mean? Mechitza imedes ve'eleha, dahainu, meaning shalai nasis l'shem mechitza. It's not something that was erected in order to be a mechitza. So a very basic example of this would be a tail, which we discussed at length yesterday. You have a mound out in the Rishos Harabim. It's 10 tefachim tall, and on its surface, it has the lateral measurements of at least daled al daled. So we're going to say, good asik mechitzasa. We're going to extend the outer mechitzas of the tail going upwards, and we're going to say that the top of the tail is considered to be mukaf mechitzas. Now, these are classic mechitzas ha'imedes me'eleha. Nobody went and built these mechitzas. This might be a hill that's there misheshes himei bereshis. So nobody went up and constructed this, and even if somebody did construct it, let's say they were doing construction nearby, and they did excavation, and they dumped the earth out in Rishos Harabim, and they made a nice, neat tail, so that you have mamish, beautiful, maybe the sides of the tail are actually vertical. They're not even a tail hamislakate. It's not sloped going up to the top. No, maybe they cut out nice vertical walls on the outside and they made a tail. But they didn't make this tail in order to erect mechitzos. They needed a place to dump down earth. So they dumped down earth. Maybe they made it neat because they didn't want it to be an eyesore. But definitely this was not made with the intention of creating any kind of mechitzos. Another example I can give you is, let's say somebody is a contractor and he has a nice piece of property. And he saw that construction materials were going up in price, so he wanted to buy some construction materials in advance for a job that he knew was coming down the pike. So he went and he purchased some beams, or maybe he purchased bricks or cinder blocks, and then he went to a piece of property that he has, and he stacked them. And the way that his workers went and stacked the construction materials, they erected mechitzos, right? I mean, if you take cinder blocks and you make stacks of them, it's very possible that you'll end up creating a mechitza that's 10 tefachim tall. And what if you create 4 such mechitzas and you actually wall in an area? Now, again, this wasn't put up l'shem mechitzos. This was done just workers were stacking construction material. But it just so happens that by stacking the construction materials, they erected mechitzos. Maybe they erected 4 mechitzos around an area, or maybe you had an area that had 2 mechitzos and they formed the other 2, but whatever it is, they created mechitzos unwittingly. That wasn't their intention. Mechitza ha'imedes me'eleha, dainu shaloi nasis l'shem mechitza, says the Mechaber, kishera these are effective mechitzas. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton tezayin keshera, va'afilu loy samchu aleha me'erev Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah is telling you over here, these mechitzas are effective mechitzas in the context of the halachas of HaTorah, even if you did not use them before Shabbos. So in other words, he's contrasting two cases. You might think, when is this an effective mechitza? If you came outside on Erev Shabbos before the Siman, and you looked and you said, oh wow, look at that. The workers went ahead and they put up the construction materials, and they walled in an area. Now I have an area that I could be metaltal inside of on Shabbos. Gewaldik, I'm going to use it on Shabbos. So then, okay, he had das on it. You're right, it wasn't made l'shem mechitzas, but he had das on it before Shabbos. Okay, I can understand that those mechitzas will be effective. But how about if that never happened? The guy woke up in the morning, Shabbos morning, he went out of his house to go to shul, and that's when he noticed that the mechitzas are there. Oh, gewaldik, mamish. Now I have an area that's a rishus hayachid. I could be metaltal b'soichad yosem edal amis. Is it still effective? Says the Mishnah, yeah. You don't need das at all. If the mechitzas are there, the mechitzas are there. Ice cotton. No, we didn't do Yud Zayin yet. Now let's go weiter in the mechaber, second line off the bottom. Another halacha. Mechitza shenasis b'Shabbos kishera. Let's say somebody erected mechitzas on Shabbos. Let's say a yid went ahead and erected mechitzas on Shabbos in contravention of halacha. Says the mechaber, mechitza shenasis b'Shabbos, if it was made on Shabbos, kishera. It's still an effective mechitza. It still is going to create, let's say, a rishus hayachid. But now there are some caveats. Says the mechaber, v'hani mili shenasis b'Shabbos b'shoigeg. First of all, it has to be that this was done b'shoigeg. Now, if it was done b'mezid, it's still going to be a halachic mechitza. But now you're not going to be allowed to gain the benefits of those mechitzas, because those mechitzas were built b'mezid in contravention of halacha. So when do we say that those mechitzas are kshera and they're fully effective and you can gain the benefits of them? That's hani milish nas b'Shabbos b'shoigeg. Avo b'mezid. But if they were erected in contravention of halacha b'mezid on Shabbos, havya mechitza lahakmir, so it's going to be a mechitza l'chumra, l'chayev azorik mirshos harabim l'soicha. If somebody went ahead and b'mezid went ahead and erected 4 mechitzas around an area, really, even if he erected 3 mechitzas around an area, well, the inside of that enclosure is a rishus hayachid l'chumra. If somebody would make an akira outside that enclosure in Rishus Harabim and throw something from the Rishus Harabim into that enclosure, which is a Rishus Hayachid, he's going to be chayiv. Because the fact is, there are mechitzas there. So it is a Rishus Hayachid. And l'chumra, those mechitzas are certainly going to be effective. Avaloi lahater l'talto b'soicha. But you're not going to be allowed to gain the benefits of those mechitzas. We're not going to rule that they're mechitzas lekula. What do I mean lekula? Well, if the inside of the enclosure is a rishus hayachid, then in there you're allowed to be metaltal yoisem idal ramas. That we're not going to let you do on Shabbos if the mechitzas were made b'mezid, because then you're being nene from the malacha that was done on Shabbos. So that you can't do. Avaloi lahater l'talto b'soicha. V'hani mili. Now another caveat. V'hani mili shaloi hayasham b'chitza tchila. This restriction that we're not going to allow you to gain the benefit of the mechitzais, that restriction is only placed upon you if there were no mechitzas enclosing that area already at the beginning of Shabbos. So there were no mechitzas. When Shabbos started, this area was aser betiltel. It wasn't walled in. Now a Yisrael went and erected mechitzas b'mezid on Shabbos. Then you can't gain the benefit of those mechitzas. Aval hoysa sham. But let's say when Shabbos started, that area was enclosed. So when Shabbos started, the inside of that enclosure was mutter betiltel yosem idalit. Aval hoysa sham vehesira, and you went ahead and took the walls down. You took the mechitzas down on Shabbos, or the mechitzas came down on their own on Shabbos. But even a bigger chiddush, even if you took them down on Shabbos, v'chazra v'nasis, and then somebody went ahead and rebuilt them b'mezid on Shabbos, afilu b'mezid, even if they were rebuilt b'mezid, chazra lehetera harishain. The area is going to go back to its original heter. So again, we had a lot of caveats over here. mechitzas were built on Shabbos. So somebody built mechitzas and enclosed an area on Shabbos. So before the mechitzas were there, that area was aser b'tiltel yoisem midalid. Now you built mechitzas, it's mutter l'taltel yoisem midalid, right? You're gaining a benefit. Says the mechaber, those mechitzas are effective on Shabbos, but now come the caveats. First of all, this is only true that those mechitzas are fully effective on Shabbos if they were built b'shoigig. If somebody built them b'shoigig on Shabbos, he forgot that it was Shabbos, or he forgot that boina was one of the lamites malachas, he forgot that you're not allowed to build on Shabbos, then you gain the full benefit of those mechitzas. It is now mutter to be metaltal yoisem midalad amas inside that enclosure. And of course, that enclosure is a bona fide rishus hayachid l'chumra. If somebody throws something into it from the rishus harabim, obviously he's chayiv. But what if somebody went ahead and he built them b'mezid on Shabbos? If he built them b'mezid on Shabbos, he did meleches iser on Shabbos. We all know when somebody does meleches iser on Shabbos, you're not allowed to gain the benefit of that melacha. Okay, so now somebody went b'mezid, enclosed an area on Shabbos. We're not going to say that it's mutter b'tiltel, then you're gaining a benefit from the meleches iser. So no, it remains also b'tiltel. But they are mechitzas, and since they are mechitzas, the inside is a rishus hayachid midaraisa. So therefore, if you throw something from rishus harabim into that enclosure, you're going to be chayiv. Another caveat. Says the mechaber, this restriction that if the mechitzas were built b'mezid, you don't get the hana, you don't get the benefit of those mechitzas, and the area remains also b'tiltel, that's only true if this area was not enclosed before Shabbos. But if the area was already enclosed before Shabbos, so when Shabbos began, this area was mutter b'tiltel, and then the walls came down on Shabbos, or they were taken down on Shabbos, and then they were rebuilt, then you can get the hana of those mechitzas, and then that area is going to be chazra leHaTorah harishon. The same way it was mutter when Shabbos came in, it's going to be mutter once again. Now, let's pause here and let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Then we're going to see the mechaber is going to give us like a case, a manifestation of these halachas. But let's see the Mishnah Berurah first. We have to pick up with Mishnah Berurah's Katan Yud Zayin on Reish Tes Zayin Amud Beis. B'Shabbos keshera. Mechitzas that were erected on Shabbos are kosher mechitzas. Va'afilu lo nasis gam kein l'shay mechitza. Even if these mechitzas have tarti l'reisa, these mechitzas have both problems. They have the problem of halacha number 1 of Sif Gimel. They were not put up l'shay mechitza. They have a new problem. They also were built on Shabbos. They're still kosher mechitzas. Ois Katan Yud Ches, the mechaber said that's only if they were put up b'shoigig. What does b'shoigig mean? Mishnah Berurah reminds us, Hainu shelo yada shahayom Shabbos. B'shoigig means somebody forgot that it was Shabbos. Shahayashigagas malacha. Hainu shelo yada shahayom Shabbos. Or shahayashigagas malacha. What is shigagas malacha? Person forgot that boina is an iser. He forgot that there's an iser of boina on Shabbos. So he knew that it was Shabbos, but he forgot that what he's doing is aser. That's what's called shoigig. Now, interesting case, says the Mishnah Berurah. How about V'emtziva Ruvain l'Shimon lasais mechitza? Ruvain tells Shimon to go build him a wall. What happened over here? Ruvain is schmoozing with Shimon, and he realizes, hey, Shimon doesn't chap that it's Shabbos. Shimon thinks it's Sunday. I need a wall. Shimon thinks it's Sunday. I can't build a wall. I know it's Shabbos. Shimon thinks it's Sunday. Hey, Shimon, build me a wall. Okay. Imtziva Ruvain l'Shimon lasis mechitza k'dei l'taltel ba. Ruvain wants to be able to be metaltel yoisem midalad amas inside his backyard. His backyard is not walled in. Shimon thinks it's Sunday. Hey, Shimon, you're a fencing guy. Put up a fence around my backyard. Oy sheyada sheshimon oisem b'shviloi v'hayanichale shetiyase k'dei sheyuchal l'taltel ba. Or stam, he knows that Shimon is going to do it if he asks him to do it. So he asks Shimon to do it, and Shimon does it. Mashbim Eloshen Rambam, Teshuv Asr l'Ruvain l'taltel ba, that this becomes Asr for Ruvain, Av sheShimon asa b'shkaga. Even if Shimon is doing it b'shoigeg, if Shimon thought that today was Sunday, or Shimon didn't realize that boina was Asr, and Ruvain knew that if he tells Shimon to build him a fence, Shimon is going to falozach on Ruvain. If Ruvain's telling me to build a fence, I guess building a fence is mutter. Now, Ruvain is a real lowlife for doing this, right? But Reuven did it. Now the shaila is, what is this called? Is this called that the fence was put up a shoygeg, so now there's no restrictions? Or is this called that the fence was put up a mazid? Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's mashma from the Rambam, that it's usher for Reuven, the ledidei nechshav k'mezid. From the perspective of Reuven, this is called mazid. Reuven did this with malice aforethought. Reuven knows that it's Shabbos. Reuven knows that this is usher. With malice aforethought, b'mezid, he instructed Shimon to do this on Shabbos. From the perspective of Reuven, this is called mazid, and therefore Reuven is not allowed to gain the benefits of this mechitza, and the enclosure is going to be usher b'tiltel yoser midalit. Ois cut yotes. So, if the walls were put up in mazid, there's certainly mechitzas l'chumra. Midaraisa, the enclosure is a rishus hayachid. You throw something from rishus harabim into that enclosure, you're going to be chayiv. But ois cut yotes avaloy lahatir. But you're not going to be able to gain the benefit. You're not going to get the kula that the interior of the closure is going to be mutter b'tiltel yoser midalit. Why? Bisham knas. That's a penalty. This is not only also for the person who put up the fence. This is also for everybody. No Yisrael is allowed to get hana from this meleches iser that somebody did on Shabbos b'mezid to go put up an enclosure. Then the Mechaber told us, another caveat, this is only true when this area was not enclosed before Shabbos, so that when Shabbos came in, this area was usher. Or if the area was walled in on Thursday, and then Friday afternoon it fell down. Bottom line is, when Shabbos came in, the area was not enclosed. If when Shabbos came in, the area was not enclosed, so it was also betiltel yoser midalid, then if a wall was put up in mazid on Shabbos, you're not allowed to gain the benefit of that wall, and it remains also betiltel. Ois kat and chaf aleph. But if it was walled in when Shabbos came in, and then the language of the Mechaber is vehesira, and you took down the wall. So again, in the case of the Mechaber's case is, it was walled in before Shabbos. When Shabbos started, it was walled in, and it was mutter betiltel, vehesira, and you took down the wall on Shabbos. Well then, if you put the wall back up, it remains also betiltel, you can't get the benefit. Says the Mishnah Berurah, l'revusa nakat. The reason the Mechaber gives us the case of vehesira, and he took the wall down b'yadayim, that's to tell us an extra chiddush. V'kolshkein kishahusra memela, right? If it was, I think I might have misspoken. The halacha that the Mechaber is telling me over here is, if it was walled in when Shabbos started, so it was mutter betiltel yoser midalid amas, and now the wall either was removed b'yadayim or it fell down, and now you rebuild the wall b'mezid, then you are allowed to get the benefit of the wall. Why? Because since when Shabbos started, this area was mutter betiltel, now, even though the wall came down or was removed, and it became also betiltel on Shabbos, and then you rebuilt the wall b'mezid, it's chazra lehetera harishon. We don't say, now you can't get the benefit of the wall that you built b'mezid. No. Instead, we say, it's chazra lehetera harishon. Since it was mutter when Shabbos started, even though now you're rebuilding the wall b'mezid, it becomes a mutter again. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber told me the case, in the case where vehesira, where you removed the wall b'yadayim on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, l'revusa nakat. That's a bigger chiddush, right? V'kolshkein kishahusra memela. In other words, if we contrast these two cases, we could easier see a kula if the wall came down by itself, right? Because then we'll look at it and we'll say, look, when Shabbos started, this area was mutter betiltel. The wall fell down. I didn't take it down. The wall fell down all by itself, and it became also betiltel. But it became also betiltel memela. The wall fell down. Now I rebuilt the wall on Shabbos b'mezid. The halach is I'm allowed to gain the benefit of that wall. But if I took the wall down b'yadayim, so I'm the one who made the enclosure also betiltel on Shabbos. Now I'm going to reap the benefit by rebuilding the wall. That's a bigger chiddush. You went ahead b'yadayim and you made it aser in the first place. The other way, it became aser on its own. Over here, you made it aser. That's a bigger chiddush. That's why the Mishnah Berurah says, that's why the Mechaber uses that case of vehesira. Now let's go back into the Mechaber, where the Mechaber is going to give us a case that shows us this. The case is a drop complicated. The Mechaber made it complicated to show us a chiddush, and then the Mishnah Berurah is going to show us a machlokes achrayim over here. But let's go through it. We'll do the math step by step. So says the Mishnah Berurah, third line down. Kigoin, for example, what's a manifestation of this halacha? Says the Mechaber, Kigoin, Shnayim oy shloisha, 2 or 3 people, who are traveling out in the Rishos HaRabim, and now they're stuck there for Shabbos. Shehekifu b'machzelois sevivoy sehem b'Rishos HaRabim. They're textile salesmen, so they have bolts of cloth. They're stuck in the middle of the Rishos HaRabim for Shabbos. They need to make an encampment. Well, perfect. They have all of these bolts of cloth. So they went ahead and they made a canvas enclosure around an area. So they put up mechitzos using fabrics, machzelois, curtains. They used curtains and they made mechitzos around an area. Okay, so now they've created a Rishos HaYachid, right? So Kagan Shnayim Shloisha Shekivu b'machzelois v'vayseim b'Rishos HaRabim. Now's where we get a little complicated. Then also, these 3 people, Reuben and Shimon and Levi, they decided that they also want to have a certain amount of privacy inside their Rishos HaYachid. V'hivdilu gam beinehem b'machzelois. Now they went ahead and they made 3 little cubicles inside their enclosure. So they made partitions out of fabric inside their enclosures, and they made 3 little cubicles. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. But they want to be able to share their gefilte fish and their cholent on Shabbos. So what do they have to do? The irvu yachad. They made it a ruvei chatzeros, right? Remember, what you now have over here is you have a perimeter curtain that creates a Rishos HaYachid inside. But now they're making 3 separate apartments. Now they're making walls inside. So Reuven's got his Rishos HaYachid, Shimon's got his Rishos HaYachid, Levi's got his Rishos HaYachid. Now, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi cannot transfer gefilte fish and cholent and deli roll back and forth between the separate apartments, because you're going from one person's Rishos HaYachid to another person's Rishos HaYachid. That's an Issa D'Rabbanan, unless you're making a Ruvei Chatzeros. So now they made it a Ruvei Chatzeros. So now they did everything right. Everything is fine. And they did this all before Shabbos. They did it all on Erev Shabbos. So they are all set up, and they're feeling very good about themselves. They made halachic mechitzos to create a Rishos HaYachid. They made separate apartments, but they remembered to make it a Ruvei Chatzeros. Mamish, everything is gevaldik. But then things started going wrong. Says the Mechaber, right now, they made it a Ruvei Chatzeros. Mutar al-metaltel mizel lozeh. No problem. Deli roll, gefilte fish, herring, kichel, wine, beer, could go back and forth between all of the individual compartments over here. Everything's good. Niglalu hamachzelois. But now, one of them woke up in the morning, Shabbos morning, and decided it's a beautiful day. We should get some fresh air inside our Rishos HaYachid, and maybe we should get some sun in our Rishos HaYachid. And he rolled up the mechitzas. So, which mechitzas are we talking about? The perimeter mechitzas. He rolled up the perimeter mechitzas. Oy He rolled up the perimeter mechitzas. The inside is no longer Rishos HaYachid. Okay, now what? Nesru. Now everything is aser. Now you can't be metaltal yoyse midal amas anywhere inside this former enclosure. It's not an enclosure anymore. You took down the mechitzas. Okay. Chazru v'nisparsu. Now you went ahead and you closed the mechitzas. You closed the mechitzas. You built mechitzas on Shabbos. Not allowed to build mechitzas on Shabbos. This would be an Isser of Baina. You made mechitzas on Shabbos. Okay, so you did Keneged Halacha. You were over an Isser Malacha. You went ahead and you made mechitzas on Shabbos. I feel b'mezid. Even if you did this b'mezid, chazru la'teran harishain. Since when Shabbos came in, this area was a Rishos HaYachid, It was enclosed with mechitzas. The mechitzas became bottle on Shabbos when somebody went ahead and rolled them up. But then they were reinstated on Shabbos. Even though they were reinstated on Shabbos, Chazra le'Torah Harishain, the area once again becomes a Rishus HaYachid, and now everything goes back le'Torah Harishain, everything is mutter. Now, you're all wondering right now, right? Why did the Mechaber have to give us this case with Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, and with interior partitions, right? We could have illustrated this halacha much easier. We could have said, Ruvain is out in the Rishus Harabim. Ruvain is a fabric salesman. Ruvain encircled an area using fabric in Rishus Harabim to create a Rishus HaYachid. He did it on Erev Shabbos. He's mutal l'taltal yosef b'dal adamas inside his enclosure. Now Nisgalgalu, Ruvain woke up in the morning and for some reason he took down his mechitzas. So now it becomes usher. Now he's not allowed to be a metaltal yosef b'dal adamas. Now he went to b'mezid and he put the mechitzas back up. Chazra le'Torah Harishain. He's allowed to be metaltal again. Why do I need Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, and why do I need interior partitions? So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah is going to answer that question. He's going to ask it, he's going to answer it, and then he's going to bring up that this is actually the topic of a machlokes. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Kan Chaf Beis. Kigoyin Shnayim. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Hayayachal l'tzayir b'pshitos be'esh echad. The Mechaber could have given us the manifestation of our halacha much more simply using one person. Shahayla mechitza gemura, who put up bona fide mechitzas, shalyada hayahamakam rishus hayachid, to create a rishus hayachid so he could be metaltal yosim midal ramas. Vehesira b'Shabbos, and then on Shabbos he took the mechitzas down. V'chazar v'asa, and then he went there and he put the mechitzas back up. Even if he did it b'mezid, since the area was mutter when Shabbos started, it's chazar le'Torah Rishon. So why did the Mechaber make it so complicated? But the Mechaber wanted to tell us this halacha in the context of multiple people, to teach me another halacha. In the Mechaber's case, where you had multiple people, you needed an eruv chatzeros. Now, an eruv chatzeros is only effective when you're dealing with multiple rishus hayachids, right? That's totally what an eruv chatzeros is. Eruv chatzeros is Ruvain has his own rishus hayachid, Shimon has his own rishus hayachid, Levi has his own rishus hayachid. Midrabanan, you're not allowed to transfer from one to the other without an eruv chatzeros. You make it eruv chatzeros, it makes it all one rishus hayachid. But if the whole enclosure is not a rishus hayachid at all, then there's no din of eruv chatzeros. The whole din of eruv chatzeros is nispatel. So in this case, where there was a perimeter enclosure, and then there were interior partitions carving up the enclosure into separate rishus hayachids, when the perimeter curtains were taken down, and the entire enclosure became ois rishus hayachid, the eruv chatzeros was also nispatel. Kamash Malon, the Mechaber, that when the perimeter curtains are put back up, not only does the whole enclosure once again become a rishus hayachid, the eruv chatzeros is reinstated. You might think that the eruv chatzeros was nispatel, and maybe now the eruv chatzeros doesn't come back, and there is such a svara to say such a thing, right? In other words, you would say like this: look, you took the perimeter mechitzas down, it's no longer a rishus hayachid. You put the perimeter mechitzas back up, yeah, it's a rishus hayachid again. You did it b'mezid, yeah, but a fact is a fact, right? Lamaisa, the area is once again enclosed. So I can understand chazra le'Torah Harishain. I get it. But the eruv chatzeros was nispatel. The eruv chatzeros just joins the individual rishuyos hayachids together. But once the perimeter was taken down, they're no longer a rishus hayachid. Now when you put the perimeter back up, yes, it's a rishus hayachid again. But now I should have to rejoin the three rishus hayachids. Kamash Malon, the Mechaber, that no, the eruv chatzeros is also automatically reinstated. That's the chiddush that the Mechaber wanted to tell us. Okay, these Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, they surrounded an area with curtains. What the Mechaber means to say is b'choil. They did this before Shabbos. V'tiknu oisam, and they made this perimeter mechitza very well. They made sure to tie the curtains down and make them very taut so that they don't blow in the wind. So they used their fabrics and they made bona fide mechitzas around the perimeter, creating a Rishos HaYachid. Then they made interior partitions, and after they made interior partitions, they made in a Eruv Chatzeros. Now, you'll ask me, wait a second, how could they make an Eruv Chatzeros? If they separated the interior, mamish, into 3 separate sections, in order to join different Rishos HaYachids together into a common Rishos HaYachid through the mechanism of an Eruv Chatzeros, they have to have access to each other. So, for example, in an apartment building where everybody owns their own unit, but they open up onto a common hallway, so over there, the apartments could join into an Eruv Chatzeros because they have access to each other. But if you have Rishuyos, my classic example that I like to use, you'll hear a lot about this when we're learning the halachas of Eruv Chatzeros, is bungalow colonies. If you have 2 bungalow colonies that are right next to each other, right? So if there's bungalow colony A and bungalow colony B, and they're separated by a fence, if there's a gate in the fence, if there's a door in the fence between bungalow colony A and bungalow colony B, so then in order to transfer from the chutzner of bungalow colony A to the chutzner of bungalow colony B, you need an Eruv Chatzeros. They could join in an Eruv Chatzeros. They become one Rishos HaYachid. But you can only become one Rishos HaYachid because you have access one to the other. What if it's not that way? What if you have bungalow colony A and bungalow colony B, and there's a brick wall that separates the 2 of them, and there's no door in the brick wall? Well, then you can't use an Eruv Chatzeros to join. How could you join? You're making yourself one? You can't make yourself one. You have no access one to the other. So what's bothering the Mishnah Berurah over here is, wait a second. They put up a perimeter curtain. They created a Rishos HaYachid. But then they put up interior curtains, cutting themselves off one from the other. So what does it mean that they made an Eruv Chatzeros to join? They don't have access one to the other. Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes, they do. Again, because even though they have curtains separating them one from the other, hello, we're not talking about a brick wall, we're talking about a curtain. There's a curtain separating them. The curtain is enough to require them to have an Eruv Chatzeros, but a curtain could be pushed out of the way, a curtain could be lifted up, so they still have access one to the other, and they're able to make it a Eruv Chatzeros. Dinai kilu yesh kaisel upesach. It's as if that there's a wall with a door, or there's a wall with a window, beineim. So you have access one to the other. Sharishus beyond the arav yachad. So now they're allowed to join together using the mechanism of Eruv Chatzeros. Azkan chafei niglalu hamachzelois. So again, in the case of the Mechaber, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, perimeter mechitza, interior mechitzas. Then the Mechaber said, Nisgal nilglalu hamachzelois. The curtains got rolled up. Which curtains? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shesvivai saying. This means the perimeter curtains. Doesn't mean the interior partitions. It means the perimeter curtains that make this whole area into a Rishos HaYachid. They were rolled up on Shabbos. Shesvivai saying. Now, v'nispatlu hamachitzos. Now you no longer have mechitzas enclosing the area. The area is no longer Rishos HaYachid. Then they put the mechitzas back in contravention of halacha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, I feel b'mezid, even if they did this b'mezid, says the Mechaber, the area becomes the Rishos HaYachid again. The Eruv Chatzeros is also reinstated. You could be metaltal yoyse b'dalad amas anywhere in this enclosure, and they could also be metaltal from one section of the interior to another section of the interior. Now is where the Mishnah Berurah is going to bring down that this is actually the topic of our machlokes. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'das Rov HaPoskim, it's the opinion of most poskim that this is actually not correct. V'das Rov HaPoskim, Debemechitza shenasa al yada b'Shabbos Rishos HaYachid, the perimeter mechitza that's actually turning this enclosure into a Rishos HaYachid, if that enclosure was rolled up on Shabbos, even though it was in place when Shabbos started, but it was rolled up on Shabbos, so it's Ois Rishus HaYachid, and now you put it back on Shabbos, the Mechaber says it's okay. You could reap the benefit of those mechitzas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Das Reiv HaPoiskim, the mechitzah shenasa yada b'Shabbos Rishus HaYachid, lo yamrin on the Chazar leHaTorah Harishain kishenasa b'Mezid. Most Akrayim disagree with this Mechaber. They say no, you don't say Chazar leHaTorah Harishain to make the enclosure back into a Rishus HaYachid. Rak im balav hachi haya oisei hamakom Rishus HaYachid shahaya mukaf mechitzais. The only time we'll say Chazar leHaTorah Harishain is in the opposite case. What do I mean the opposite case? The Mechaber's case is there were perimeter mechitzas and there were internal partitions. Said the Mechaber, if the perimeter curtains were removed, so the area is no longer a Rishus HaYachid, and it were put back on Shabbos b'Mezid, Chazra leHaTorah Harishain, the entire enclosure becomes once again a Rishus HaYachid. These poskim say no. If the perimeter was taken down and it was put back up on Shabbos, it's also betiltel, Yosem Idalid. We don't say Chazra leHaTorah Harishain. When do we say Chazra leHaTorah Harishain? On the internal, the interior partitions. Those are only a din d'Rabbanan, right? If the perimeter curtains remain in place, so what's the din midaraisa? Once you have the perimeter curtains up, the whole area inside midaraisa is a Rishus HaYachid. And midaraisa, even if there are interior partitions, midaraisa, you're allowed to be metaltal from one to the other. It's all a Rishus HaYachid. It's only a din d'Rabbanan that you're not allowed to be metaltal from Reuven to Shimon, from Shimon to Levi, and that you needed a Reuven Chatzeros in order to do it. Over there, we say Chazra leHaTorah Harishain. What's the case? You put up all of these partitions before Shabbos, right? You put them up. Well, you know what the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us the case. Says the Mishnah Berurah, for example, you put up your perimeter curtains before Shabbos, and you made the whole inside a Rishus HaYachid. And then you put up your interior partitions to make separate Rishus HaYachids inside. Ve'ervu kol achas b'fnei atzma. But they did not join in an Eruv Chatzeres. Now, I want to be very careful. I want you to be very clear what the Mishnah Berurah just said. The ervu kol achas, each one made an eruv b'fnei atzma, on their own. What does he mean? He means like this. Let's say it's not Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Let's say it's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. And now what happened is they put up the perimeter, so the entire interior now of the enclosure is Rishus HaYachid. Then they started putting up interior partitions. Reuven put up a partition, made himself his own section. Shimon put up a partition, made himself his own section. Levi put up a partition, and inside Levi's partition, they made another curtain dividing that partition in half. So now you have like this: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. In other words, one of the sections is cut in half into two. Or it could be they're four next to each other: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Now what happened? Levi and Yehuda are best buddies. Or maybe Levi and Yehuda are brothers. Levi and Yehuda decided to make it a Reuven Chatzeres together. So between Levi and Yehuda, they made a relatively flimsy mechitza, and Levi and Yehuda made it a Reuven Chatzeres together. No problem. Reuven wasn't interested in having anything to do with Shimon. Shimon wasn't interested in having anything to do with Levi and Yehuda. So you know what they did? Reuven made a real tight mechitza between him and Shimon that's considered that they're cut off. Reuven is cut off from Shimon. He can't make it a Reuven Chatzeres even if he wanted to. Shimon made a real tough mechitza between him and Levi and Yehuda. He can't make it a Reuven Chatzeres, not with Reuven, not with Levi and Yehuda, even if he wanted to. Okay, so when Shabbos started, what's the halacha of this nice community over here? The halacha is, midaraisa, The whole enclosure is the Rishus HaYachid. Midaraisa, you're allowed to go wherever you want. Midarabanan, Ruvain could be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside his enclosure, but he can't go to Shimon. He needs to do Ruva Chatzeres. Shimon could be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet inside his enclosure, but he can't go to Ruvain. He doesn't have any Ruva Chatzeres. He can't go to Levi and Yehuda. He doesn't have any Ruva Chatzeres. Levi and Yehuda could be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis, and they could also go between each other, because they made an Erev. That's what the Mishnah Berurah means here. Ve'ervu kalachas b'fnei atzma. They're all separated. Even if there is an Eruv Chatzeres, the reason I'm saying this is because the Mishnah Berurah says ve'ervu. Ve'ervu. They made an Erev. What do you mean they made an Erev? Yeah, they made an Erev because Levi and Yehuda made an Erev. Ve'ervu kalachas b'fnei atzma. But the point over here is that right now the compartments are separated midrabanan, with the exception of Levi and Yehuda. Okay. Ukishenafla oisa mechitza. But now you know what happened? The interior partitions came down. The partition between Reuben and Shimon came down. The partition between Shimon and Levi came down. Nesru l'taltal mipnei she'oisrin zeh. Now you have a big problem. Now you have a very big problem. When Shabbos started, Reuven had his own enclosure. He's allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside his enclosure. Shimon had his own enclosure. He's allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside his enclosure. But what happens if the mechitza between Reuven and Shimon comes down? If the mechitza between Reuven and Shimon comes down, now they aser on each other. Now Reuven's enclosure is completely breached to Shimon's enclosure. Shimon's enclosure is completely breached to Reuven's enclosure. But they're not allowed to go back and forth to each other because they don't have any Ruva Chatzeros. Once the halacha becomes that they're not allowed to go back and forth to each other, the halacha also becomes that they're not allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside their enclosures. So you hear what I'm saying? When Shabbos started, Reuven was allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside his enclosure. Shimon was allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside his enclosure. But now that the partition came down on Shabbos, or it was removed on Shabbos, now neither Reuven nor Shimon are allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis even inside their own enclosure. So they know where the line of demarcation between them is. We know. What do you mean? The mechitza was right here. It came down. But we know it was right here. So we'll be good boys. Even though the mechitza is not here, we won't transfer one to the other. We know we're not allowed to do that. But could we still be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis in our own sides? No, you're not. Because once you're breached one to the other, and you're not allowed to be metaltal back and forth to each other, you're also not allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside your own enclosure. So now you have a problem. The Achrayim say, that's where we say Chazra leHeTorah Rishon if the mechitza is put back up amazing. If Reuven says, I can't take this anymore, and he puts up the curtain between him and Shimon again, b'mezid, on Shabbos, Chazra leHeTorah Rishon, and now Reuven and Shimon are allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis inside their own areas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, in that case, if they go back and they put the mechitza back up, I feel a bit amazed after ba'asiyasei over al iser Torah, even though it's an iser daraisa of buying to put that mechitza up, because this is only din darabanan, it's not a din daraisa. Midaraisa, it's all a rishus hayachid, because the perimeter curtains never came down. Ve'ena bar rak lechalak adiyurin. V'gam bazeh davka kishakvar hoyse shama mechitza el shenafla. And again, this is only mutter if when Shabbos came in, the mechitza was up. Avalim loy hoyse shama mechitza v'asa b'Shabbos. But if you went into Shabbos without the interior partitions, and then you went to put them up, after rak lechalak adiyurin, aser, it would be aser. Okay, let's go a little bit weiter. Let's go to Sifdalid, says the Mechaber. Svina mutal atalto b'kula. On a ship, you're allowed to be metaltal Yosim B'Dalet Amis anywhere on the ship. Afilu hu Yosim Beis Hasayim, even if this boat is bigger than a Beis Hasayim. Why? The chashiva mukefes l'dira. We're assuming that the boat is mukaf mechitzas. Why? Because we're assuming that the side walls of the ship are more than 10 tefachim tall. They're elevated more than 10 tefachim off of the water level, certainly off of the bottom of the ship, off the keel, right? You have to know how wide the keel is, etc., etc. But we're assuming that you have good asik mechitzos that go up and extend and surround the upper deck of the ship as well. So you could be metaltal as much as you want, even if the boat is bigger than a beis sasayim. We don't have a problem here of karpev shaliukov ladira. Why, says the Mechaber? The chashiva mukefes ladira. Because a boat is considered to be mukefes ladira. People live on it. Now, kifa'a, let's say you take a boat. You're on dry land. You take a boat and you turn it over. Why? You're trying to create a shelter. You need some place to live. Rent got too high. You have a very big boat. You turn the boat upside down, you cut a door. Now you could live under the boat. Now when you turned the boat over, you created mechitzos, right? You would close the area under the boat. If you turned over the boat in order to live under it, have a rishus hayachid afaleha. It's a rishus hayachid under the boat, and it's a rishus hayachid on top of the boat, on top of the overturned boat. Why? Gorasik mechitzasa. Again, it has to be that the upper surface of the overturned boat is daled al daled. Can't be that it's mamish a pointy boat. But if the upper surface of the overturned boat has the lateral dimensions of at least daled al daled, then it's mukaf mechitzas, gorasik, and the top of the boat is also rishus hayachid. Kifa lezafta. But what if you didn't turn over the boat in order to live under it? You turned over the boat for maintenance purposes. You turned over the boat because it needs a new coat of paint. Or in the definition of the Mechaber, it needs a new coat of zephes. It needs waterproofing. It needs pitch. So you didn't turn it over to live under it. You didn't turn it over ledira. You turned it over for maintenance. Ein metaltalin ba, ela ba'arba amois im yoisem isasayim. So then it depends. If underneath the boat is an enclosed area that's less than 5,000 square amas, well, it's a rishus hayachid. It's enclosed. Go ahead. You could be metaltal yoisim midal amas underneath it. You could also be metaltal yoisim midal amas on top of it. Good asik, and the top is also a rishus hayachid. But now you're going to be restricted by the halacha of karpev shaloi hukaf ledira. If this is a very big boat, and underneath it is more than 5,000 square amas, and on top of it is more than 5,000 square amas, well, yes, there are mechitzas, but not ledira. Because you didn't erect these mechitzas ledira. You didn't turn over the boat to create a dira. You turned over the boat for maintenance purposes. So it's a karpev shaluk of ledira. You're restricted to a beis sasayim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, come on, Siman shin samach vav sif beis baga. Ches af aleha. You can be metaltal under the boat. You can be metaltal on top of the boat. Why? Darmina gorasik mechitzasa. Vafilu hu yoisem mi beis sasayim gam came out to letaltal sham. They came to lamata mukaf ledira. Because since when you overturned the boat, you did it for dira. So those side walls were put up for dira. The good asik mechitzas are also considered to be hukaf ledira. But if it's bigger than a beis sasayim, you're restricted to arba amois. Ela ba'arba amois tebazeh shekfa lazafta, by turning it over to put on a new layer of pitch. Bitel mechitzay sami teres dira. That is not dira. V'lachein af tachtea emitaltel ba ela ba'arba amois kevin sheyoysim mi beis sasayim v'cholshkein lamayla. I'm going to go a little bit further. Says the Mechaber Sifei, Ba'koil oisem mechitza. You could erect mechitzas constructed out of anything. Bekalim. You want to create a mechitza out of pots and pans? Stack up pots and pans? Gesundheit. Ubu ukafais, or with saddles. Bein shel erev levad. You could make mechitzas that are only made out of horizontal ropes. Kigon shel chavolim. Oy shel shesi levad. Or vertical posts. Poles that are stuck into the ground. But remember what we learned earlier. If it's shesi b'loy erev or erev b'loy shesi, it's called a mechitza gerua. It's a halachically weak mechitza, and therefore there's a restriction. Umetaram sasayim. If it's shesi b'loy erev, erev b'loy shesi, right? It's a mechitza gerua. You can only go up to a beis sasayim. Afil yachid b'yishuv, and in Tula beis sasayim, up to 5,000 square amas, a mechitza grua is fine. Not only if you did it out in the rolling plains of grain because you were stuck and you had no Home Depot. No, it's mutter even b'yishuv, even in the parking lot of Home Depot, where you could easily go inside and buy good materials. No. Still, shesi b'loy erev, erev b'loy shesi, a mechitza grua works up to a beis sasayim. But remember, if you're doing erev b'loy shesi, the ropes have to be within share lavud of each other. If you're doing shesi b'lo erev, the poles have to be within share lavud of each other. You can make your mechitzas out of pots and pans or out of saddles. Even though everybody knows that you're taking these mechitzas down after Shabbos, it's still valid. Horizontal without vertical, ropes. You put up 4 posts at the corners, and then you made ropes horizontally. Ad sasayim, you could enclose an area up to a base sasayim, v'lo yoser, afilum hekef ladur l'shtamisham. Even if you did it l'shem dira, it's a mechitza grua. Kevichi mechitza grua, shesi v'lo yer, v'lo shesi. V'ayla el simin shin samach bebir halacha. Oiskat lam gimel, you could use a mechitza grua up to a base sasayim, afilu l'yachid b'yishuv. Even if you're right down the block from Home Depot, tzanu loymar, avshe b'yishuv yachal hasik b'malas is mechitza toiva, even though, why should we be makel on you? Go ahead, make a mechitza toiva. Why are you making a mechitza grua? Remember, midaraisa, this is an enclosure. Remember, the ropes have to be within share lavud, the posts have to be within share lavud. According to this, you could make a mechitza 10 tfachim tall with 4 horizontal ropes. Why? From the ground until rope number 1, a little bit less than 3 tfachim. So you're at now, let's say, the 3 tefach mark. Then a little bit less than 3 tfachim, rope number 3. You're at approximately 6 tfachim. Then a little less than 3 tfachim to the next rope, and then a little bit, and you're at 10. So you could make it out of 4 ropes. If you're using a wide rope, so that the rope is a little bit thicker than a tefach, so you're using more like a band, I'm thinking of ratchet straps. You could use a mechitza Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discuss Limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, Yeshua Sefruas Panas and Shedukim Tolaz Need. We should be zeichet to see the V'yeskal Tzedek. V'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.